ever like completely bombed a presentation. It's like, you know, that feeling, that recurring nightmare where you're presenting in your underwear,
Oh, yeah.
only it's real life and everyone is awkwardly eating pastries while you just, die up there.
Right.
Yeah. And so today's deep dive is like your presentation makeover montage.
Yes.
We're dissecting storyboarding and presentation writing, and not just to like avoid those pastry-fueled nightmares, but to really master the art of making an impact when you communicate.
You know, what I find so interesting about the source is how much it zeroes in on this idea of storyboarding.
Yeah.
You know, when you hear storyboarding, you might think, oh, well, that's for like Hollywood types. But it's really the secret sauce, I think, to presentations that really grab you.
Okay, so imagine this. Your presentation is a blockbuster movie.
Hmm.
Okay. Each slide, that's a scene. And you're building to this epic finale. Something that leaves your audience wanting more.
Yeah.
And that's the magic of storyboarding, right? It's about crafting a narrative, like a journey for your audience to go on, not just sort of like throwing information at them, like confetti in a windstorm.
Yeah, and just like a good movie, it needs a really solid script, right? Your presentation needs a strong foundation.
Right.
And the source talks about this idea of identifying the necessary and sufficient arguments.
So it's about cutting through the noise, zeroing in on that core message. It's like if your presentation was a house, these arguments would be like, the load-bearing beams holding the whole thing together.
Yeah.
It's about being ruthless.
Right. Absolutely. Ruthless with your content. You really want to only present what is absolutely essential.
Right.
For your audience to really understand and be persuaded by your message. It's about, making every element really count.
And what I appreciate about this source is that they make this process feel very approachable. They talk about using Post-it notes, flip charts, even just plain old paper to brainstorm and organize your thoughts, like giving yourself permission to play before the pressure's on.
Right.
What about you? Do you have a favorite way to kind of brainstorm and get those ideas out?
I'm a whiteboard person myself.
Yeah.
I think there's something about seeing everything visually laid out that helps me make those connections. But you're right. The key is to find what works for you.
Yeah.
Unleash your creativity in that initial planning phase.
So we've got our story ingredients prepped. They're ready to go. How do we actually structure them into a presentation that hooks the audience from the first slide? What's the secret there?
Well, I mean, the source kind of reminds us of that classic framework, right? Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's presentation 101 for a reason, right?
Right. Okay.
But it's not about being totally formulaic about it either.
Right. Because who wants to sit through a presentation that feels like a robot is reading a script?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where things get really interesting, because the source really emphasizes that, the order of those elements, it's not set in stone.
Okay.
Maybe you want to start with the problem that you're addressing, especially if you really need to grab the audience's attention, or maybe you want to start with the solution, and that can be really effective when you've got an audience that's really pressed for time,
Right.
They need to know the answer now. So think about it like choosing the order of ingredients, in a recipe. You can shake things up to create different flavors, different experiences.
So it's about being strategic, tailoring your approach
Yeah.
to your specific goals and your audience,
That's
right?
exactly.
And speaking of strategy, the source introduces this really cool concept. They call it the hypothesis-driven logic flow, also known as the pyramid logic structure.
Right.
Now, I'll admit, when I first read that, I thought, ooh, that sounds a little intimidating. Like, is this a logic class? I thought this was, presentation skills.
Yeah, no, it sounds a lot more complex than it actually is, I promise.
Okay.
So imagine like a pyramid, right?
Sorry.
And at the very, very top of that pyramid is your main hypothesis, your big idea.
Okay.
And then as you move down the pyramid, each level represents a supporting argument for that idea, followed by the evidence and the facts that back it up.
Got it.
So it's all about creating this really clear line of reasoning that your audience can easily grasp onto.
So kind of like building a case in court. You need that evidence. You need to back up your claims.
Exactly.
It's about persuading, not just informing.
Yes. And the beauty of this structure is that it forces you to think critically about your arguments. Like, do they actually hold water? Do you really have the evidence to support what you're saying? It's about making sure that your presentation, it isn't just a collection of ideas, but it's a cohesive, compelling argument.
So we've got the story, right? We've got the structure. Now let's talk about the visuals, because let's face it, even the most brilliant ideas can fall flat if your slides look like, I don't know, a ransom note assembled by a kindergartner with too many crayons. Right?
Oh, absolutely. And luckily, the source is great about this. It's a gold mine of really practical advice on slide design.
Yeah.
And one of the most, I think, memorable tips that I took away from it is something they call the rule of two.
Okay.
Which sounds, deceptively simple, but trust me, it's a game changer.
Okay, I'm hooked. Give me the 2-minute lowdown on the rule of two. What's the deal?
So basically, it's about imposing these constraints on yourself. So you limit each element on your slide, whether it's your headline, whether it's your bullet points, your subpoints, to a maximum of 2 lines.
Okay.
2 lines. Think of it as like haiku for presentations.
Ooh, I like that.
Right. It forces you to be concise, it forces you to be impactful, and it keeps your audience from, playing spot the period in this sea of text,
No more walls of text.
No more walls of text.
I can get behind that. There's nothing worse than feeling like your eyes are doing a marathon just trying to get through a single slide.
Exactly. And speaking of things that, grab attention, let's talk headlines for a second.
Yes.
Because, forget slide 7.
Yeah. Nobody's here for slide 7.
Exactly. Think of your headlines like those like clickbait titles, but with substance, of course.
Right.
That you see everywhere online.
Right.
Because it's that first impression.
It's got to promise something juicy, right?
Right.
Make you want to know more.
Exactly. It should tell a story on its own, even without the rest of the slide.
Yeah.
If it doesn't pass that, scroll stopping test, you got to go back to the drawing board.
I love that, the scroll stopping test. And then just when they're hooked, right, by that killer headline, you hit them with a bumper.
Yes.
I love that term.
Yes.
From the source.
The bumper.
It's like that little nudge you give someone to make sure they're paying attention.
Yes. The bumper is great because it directly addresses that so what question. Yeah.
It highlights that key takeaway, that aha moment for your audience.
It's connecting the dots, showing them why this matters to them. It's like that friend who, when you're talking about a movie, they're like, okay, but here's the part you need to remember.
Yeah. Exactly. And it really brings us back to storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Because even at the slide level, you're crafting these mini narratives.
Right.
With a beginning, a middle, and an end.
And speaking of storytelling, let's talk about the power of visuals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes a single image can just convey more than, 1,000 bullet points ever could.
Oh, absolutely. And, this source makes a great point about using visuals strategically.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Diagrams, charts, images. These can all be incredibly powerful tools to make your presentation stickier, more engaging, more memorable. Okay.
There's always a but, right?
There's always a but. And this but is really crucial.
Yeah.
Just because you can add a million visuals doesn't mean you should.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Because a cluttered slide is like a cluttered mind.
Right. No one learns anything.
Nobody learns anything.
Yeah, it reminds me of this presentation I saw once where they had this it looked like a seismograph reading during an earthquake,
Yeah.
I spent the entire time trying to decipher these lines, and I couldn't even tell you what the content of the presentation was,
It's true. That's the danger of overdoing it.
Yeah.
And I think the key takeaway here is when it comes to visuals, simplicity reigns supreme.
Okay.
Right. You want to choose images that are clear, that are concise, and most importantly, that are directly relevant to your message.
Yeah. You want them to enhance your message. You don't want them to distract from it.
It's like that Coco Chanel quote where she's like, before you leave the house, look in the mirror and take one thing off.
Right.
It's the same principle with presentations.
Edit ruthlessly, whether it's, words, whether it's images. When in doubt, less is more.
It's funny. We've talked about slides and visuals and structure. And honestly, the more we kind of dig into this source, the more I realize it all comes back to one thing, which is it's about telling a story.
Yeah.
It's like the thread that ties everything together.
It's the most, it's the oldest form of communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we are hardwired to respond to stories.
Yeah.
They make us lean in, they make us feel something. And that's incredibly powerful.
Yep.
Even in a professional setting.
Because facts alone aren't always enough, right?
Yeah.
To really move people to action.
Nope.
But a good story, that can change hearts and minds.
Absolutely. And you think about the most persuasive people they're often, whether they realize it or not, they're really good storytellers.
Yeah.
They know how to weave a narrative that draws you in, that makes you actually care about what's going to happen.
So how do we tap into that? How do we become better storytellers in our own presentations?
Well, the source had some great advice on this, and it really starts with understanding your audience.
Right.
What are their needs? What are the things that keep them up at night? What are they hoping for? What are their aspirations? And once you really understand that, then you can start to craft a story that's going to resonate with them.
Yeah, they actually have this little checklist of questions.
Right.
That they encourage you to ask yourself for every single slide.
Yeah.
And it's things like, what's the key message here? Is it clear? Does it connect to that bigger story I'm telling? It's like having a little presentation coach.
Yeah.
On your shoulder.
Totally.
And that's what this whole deep dive has been about, right?
It really is.
Giving you the tools and the insights you need to be a more confident, compelling communicator.
Yeah, we've covered so much ground, right?
Oh, right.
From storyboarding to slide design, from bumpers to the power of visuals.
Mm-hmm. It's not about memorizing a bunch of rules, right?
Yeah.
It's about taking these ideas and kind of making them your own.
And that kind of brings us to our final thought for you today, which is that all of these principles we've been talking about, they're not just confined to the boardroom or the conference hall.
Right.
They apply everywhere.
Because every time you communicate, you're telling a story.
You are.
Whether it's an email or a social media post or even just, a conversation with a friend.
That's right. So ask yourself, how can you, inject a little more of that storytelling magic into those everyday interactions? How can you make your words really resonate, inspire, persuade?
Now that's something to think about.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep crafting those compelling stories, one conversation at a time.